Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press and of the military and intelligence community, it's official. We have UFOs. They are real. Unidentified aerial phenomenon have been detected, and 144 were analyzed. One was identified, 80 with the latest equipment of the US Navy that was given to them in March 2019 to utilize, and 18 of which exhibit various forms of exotic physics, 11 of which nearly affected fatal air incidents. So the world has changed. The UFO is real, removing the stigma. So this is a tiny hair width of a change for ufologists, but for the world, it is large indeed. Now scientists can begin to examine UFOs without losing their credibility. Pilots are encouraged by the report to, in fact, report all of their UAP sightings, encouraged. And within the halls of military and intelligence, it's no longer a giggle factor, it is an open phenomenon to be discussed with implications. So that small hair width of change has changed this field. It behooves now the ufological community to utilize the academic method, the scientific method, peer review science, so that we bring the data forwards. This is an independent statement from the international academic and civilian ufological community as a response to the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, the US government, and the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force's preliminary report. I will be expanding on the politics behind what has taken place. This is not a coincidence. This has been longly orchestrated by dedicated individuals within the military, the intelligence, and government community of circles, together with researchers as well. We wrote over several years the mainstream media UAP bibliography, spanning from 2017 till the announcement on June the 25th, so that we had an overview of what was transpiring through the mainstream media on the subject. This itself is historic to ufology. There has not been such a long stretch of significant reporting, non-skeptical per se reporting, but looking at the UAP phenomenon and the testimonies and giving ear to those testimonies to the public at large. So we personally came into this particular area and assembling this bibliography when in March the 16th of 2016, we had a UAP or UFO encounter. In Norway, I was impulsed to go out into the forests at treetop level. We had an encounter, and with it came a image stream which had intelligence. Now, this is something I've and many others are familiar with. It doesn't always happen. UFOs don't happen often, except in my early lifetime, there were waves. So the consciousness component is central. In that wave, it was relayed that Donald Trump would probably win the election. I put in the probable. That was the image. He would win the election. It would affect the UFO field, that I should prepare. I was assigned to go to the US in 2016 for something, and that I should prepare to go to North America for precisely such an international multi-metropolitan press conference as this, and other things that are ad hoc or related. So all of this came to pass. And we are on the record since 2016, on the public record. So this is just thrown in there as well. Since all of this came to pass, in December of 2017, 16th of December, the New York Times, of course, published those two articles by Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean on the ATIP program. And the ATIP program was this secret program that was set up by Senator Harry Reid in 2007 using $20 million plus top secret to create the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program to investigate UFO phenomenon critically and far and wide. So that was the beginning of a whole tidal wave of events in the media. We started to assemble from that point onwards, as you can see in our mainstream media UAP bibliography. In the anthology of significant UFOlogical proceedings, you have a further detailed chronology of what has been released to the public in terms of significant UFO evidence and events that have covered this subject. But still, because there was not confirmation that these objects are real and are intelligent and are detected by multiple radar systems and multiple forms of technology, including satellite data, not just camera data or visual data. And 80 of those are in the Office for the Director of National Intelligence report. A new science may now emerge as we start to examine these identified, unidentified aerial phenomena. They are registered, they are real. 2020 was a historic year. In March, the world experienced its first global lockdown ever. 2 months later, in May, the Department of Defense of the USA announced that the films that had been leaked, including to the New York Times, were in fact their films, that the objects on those films are genuine, unidentified aerial phenomenon. This was historic. This was the first time that was announced to the world. By July, the New York Times started to interview various people that have been involved, like Dr. Eric Davis and Christopher Mellon, as well as Senator Harry Reid, speaking of off-world objects that had been retrieved, of metamaterials, etc. By August, it was announced by the Department of Defense that there is the brand new UAP task force established. Then by November, the Director of National Intelligence, John Radcliffe, had a big report, at least 125 pages, which had multiple sightings. And in fact, the number of UFOs or UAPs was classified, he said, and with significant films of high quality and photographs and multiple data, at least 5 different data forms. He was trying then to declassify a great deal of that material, but then the election happened, and of course the administration changed. He testified to that fact on Fox News, March 19th, 2021. And by December, the NDAA, the National Defense and Authorization Act, that had been already established in the summer of 2020, was attached to the COVID relief bill, giving the 17 branches of intelligence, the military, and the government 180 days to bring in the report with all of their data files. Of course, come June the 25th, we do not have that series of data files. What we do know is that the majority of the material is classified, because this brand new material that was received for technology and analysis is classified. We know from the attorney, Daniel Sheehan, with his 3 interactions with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence between May and July, that the report, the classified report, is 400 pages. So Radcliffe in November 2020 talked about 120 pages plus films and photographs, but the present report that has not been given to the public yet in any form, in any reduced form either, we just have 9 pages, is 400 pages. We know from Senator Nelson, who is now the administrative head of NASA, who's also seen the classified report, that it contains significant data, high quality films, high quality photographs, and data from multiple sources. We know from the report that has been declassified June the 25th, that there are 80 such cases, 18 of which have this exotic technology. And they also kept parallel trajectories to the Navy vessels in the Pacific and vanished without a trail. So the radar data was also released this summer with the USS Omaha, and that is official. By 2020, the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, admitted the films were theirs, they were real, the UFOs were also real. Other films in the meantime were released, and this includes up to this year, and the Pentagon again affirmed that this is theirs. So in 2019, July, a window opened where many hundreds of UFOs began to interact with the Navy ships. And this is part of the research of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. These objects would do incursions on multiple vessels. The Navy has control of the biggest area surface of the world, has the most airplanes, more than the Air Force. So they were having these hundreds of incursions in July, which were picked up on radar, which were picked up on forwards radar, which were picked up with other technology, as well as observation and films. And some of those films were recently released and again admitted, confirmed by the Department of Defense to be unknown aerial phenomena. They would be there for 2 to 3 hours in the Pacific, and some of them behaved exotically, transmedial vehicles being able to pass into water without being affected by the change of the medium. They also completely vanished. So this was a part focus of the classified aspect of the report. So it behooves the UFOlogical community to now press for a declassification without violating national security of the actual report, because initially the NDAA bill was supposed to bring that in part to the public. A new science is emerging. There are pioneers, and there are going to be now many, many scientists, many academics, many researchers working together in concert as an independent statement, not belonging to any intelligence, military, or government group. This panel is voicing the research community. I highly recommend and suggest that the academic research community of ufology becomes a global body that is independent, using the academic process and including the scientific process and peer-reviewed studies of the documents that we produce, of course, cooperating with the various governments, military, intelligence. GARPAN has done that in Canada with the Canadian Space Agency. That might well happen now with NASA, as Senator Nelson is head there and has been briefed on the reality of this phenomenon. So also Professor Ruggiero Maria Santilli has invited this august body of panelists whose work from the 3 different branches of languages will be assembled into a worldwide conference up ahead to write their papers on their statements, bearing in mind that they may go through a peer review process by a scientific body and board of international scientists, if you so choose to do that. This is a progress for ufology. The Hadronics Journal was created in Harvard 43 years ago. There are esteemed, established scientists from many, many countries on the board that will do the scientific review. So this is a milestone. Wonderful panelists from the diverse branches of ufology, an independent statement to the press, to the military intelligence community, and to everyone else who's joining into this new reality. Thank you.
My name is James Lowe. I'm a retired California attorney who worked with elected officials for 40 years. I also taught a class in government decision making at the San Diego State University School of Public Affairs. This background of my own life experiences caused me to write the UFO briefing book, A Congressional Guide to Oversight of the UAP Phenomena. In April, copies were distributed to the Biden administration, congressional leadership, and every committee member scheduled to receive the UAP report. On June 25th, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, filed its report with the House and Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. As expected, this report raised more questions than it answered. Unfortunately, it only considered incidents occurring between November 2004 and March 2021. Most were visual sightings confirmed by electronic data. Congress will receive a new incident update on September 23rd using the same flawed criteria. These evidentiary limitations will not give Congress the answers it needs. These limits follow a historic pattern of resistance to disclosure. Congress must review past cases and other relevant evidence to find answers. Yet the report contained a couple of important factual findings. It found that UAP are physical objects seen on multiple sensors. This is a historically significant admission. Going forward, admitting the physical reality of UAP will change the debate. It will now be less about whether these objects are real and more about who controls them. Answers to questions about control and purpose are vital to ensuring proper congressional oversight. Of the 144 cases, only one was identified, a deflating balloon. The unidentified cases comprised 99.3% of the survey. This percentage of unknowns far exceeds any previous official study, with unknowns usually around 20 to 25%. The report also found multiple types of UAP. If the phenomena is solely created on Earth, it would mean UAP are a product of multiple revolutionary advances over many decades. With many object types, one questions whether another country could spend decades perfecting multiple platforms under our noses, yet not effectively using them. We have been here before. A 1964 study was submitted to Congress showing remarkable consistency with today's UAP videos. NICAP distributed the UFO evidence, a survey of cases from 1942 to 1963. For instance, the Roosevelt Go Fast video showed a small spherical object identical to objects comprising 17% of the NICAP survey. The objects date back to World War II Foo Fighters, which shadowed combat aircraft. The Roosevelt gimbal displayed a disc-like object that had a large protrusion on top. The gimbal object falls under the NICAP's flattened sphere category. The UFO evidence noted that these spheres would sometime have a peak. The 1964 representation looks like the gimbal object with the same pointed peak. Finally, the Nimitz Tic Tac falls into NICAP's oval category, comprising 13% of the case. By restricting the sample size to a short 16-year window, the ODNI ignores past confirmatory evidence. These are self-imposed time and source limitations. Also, ODNI admitted the stigma about UFOs prevented it from drawing firm conclusions. This stigma was a result of decades of government policy. To conclude, almost all UAP are real physical objects that exhibited unusual flight characteristics. There are multiple types of UAP, making it highly improbable they all come from a terrestrial source. This finding alone means that a wider net is needed for any future investigations. In conclusion, like peeling an onion, Congress must pull back each layer to get to the truth. Constant progress should be the intention of Congress, given the obstacles they are facing. I hope this was informative and thank you for your attention.
My name is Chris Stiles. I'm a civilian UFO researcher based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And I sit on the board of directors for the Shag Harbor UFO Incident Society. And this video is just to give my reaction to the Pentagon's release about UAP. On June 25th of 2021, the DNI, or Director of National Intelligence, released a report that was titled Preliminary Assessment, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. It was a report meant to assess the threat potential of UAP and to make recommendations to the director of how to develop policies, methods, tech, and training for U.S. personnel. Perhaps most significant in this release was the admission that most of the UAPs reported probably do represent physical objects, given that the majority of UAP sightings were registered across multiple platforms. So what has the DNA and UAP task force concluded from this review? Well, firstly, that there are multiple types of UAP and that their appearance and behavior suggest different explanations. Second is the need for a better understanding through better reporting practices. 3, perhaps most important, is the conclusion here, which states UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue and may in fact pose a challenge to national security. 4, and I think this is the most interesting for ufology, is that a handful of UAP encounters, which basically is 18 of 144, with 11 near collisions, appear to demonstrate advanced technology. The report then backpedals slightly, saying that further analysis is needed to make that determination a certainty. Let's examine what some of the pilots whose observations were part of the impetus for this report had to say. There were two stories that became public through coverage in the New York Times. The first was in December 2017, and it concerns itself mostly with the 2004-2005 Tic Tac UAP sightings. These were made by the USS Nimitz Strike Group in the Pacific. The second story, and the one that we're going to look at here today, is the March 2019 coverage by the Times. And it involved observations of UAP by Super Hornet aircrews flying from the deck of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. This was the summer of 2014 up to and including March 2015. Lieutenants Ryan Grave and Danny Aucoin of the Red Rippers spoke on the record in these interviews, and they give a very detailed account of UAP while flying and training basically 30,000 to 20,000 people, sometimes even down to sea level. And what they were seeing were UAPs that appeared as a sphere encased in a cube. These objects could fly for 12 hours at a time without a need for refueling. The forward-looking infrared in the Super Hornets never detected any heat emissions. And unlike the Nimitz UAP sightings in the Pacifics, these newer Super Hornets of the Teddy Roosevelt could detect the UAPs on radars and track them in all cases. At times, the sphere within a cube type of UAPs they were seeing exhibited instantaneous acceleration up to velocities of 7,200 miles per hour. Well, in my opinion, all of these aforementioned flight characteristics, they clearly speak of breakthrough technology. On page 7 of the task force report, they state that they're looking for ways to increase data and find things where U.S. forces may not be present, where sightings are extant. Well, I have a general suggestion here. Why not use the civilian UFO groups' databases? MUFON, for example, theirs is well organized, and certainly there would be similar cases. I know this personally, in fact, because on September the 15th, 2018, here in Nova Scotia, there was a sighting of a cube-like structure within a sphere, kind of the reverse, but again, similar. And this was observed flying over Cape Sable Island, Nova Scotia, for over 90 minutes. I was actually fortunate enough to be present for the last 7 minutes of this sighting. It was a daytime sighting. There was video footage from before my arrival on scene, dozens of witnesses. It's case 95442 in the files of MUFON. And in the Nova Scotia case, there's the possibility of further sensor data, because about 5 kilometers away from the scene of the sighting where it played out, there's an automated NORAD facility. And at the time, I would say between 1,500 and 1,620 hours, Atlantic Standard Time, local, there should be data that would be very useful for this. Like I say, physically, this compared to the sighting, same appearance. I may have even seen 2 bursts of instant acceleration that appeared simply as disappearance and reappearance. But that could be locked in the data there at this NORAD facility, really. I have a warning too here for UFO researchers that are trying to assess historic UAP events in cases where their own nation's resources are working hand in hand with US military and intelligence agencies. And it's this. In October of 2003, I successfully negotiated the release of something called the Space Object Contingency Plan. In fact, it looks like this right here. And as you see, it has a second title down below. I think it'll show up. Yes, the master plan, which the RCMP officer who helped me release this said was unfortunate. It was a giggle moment. However, this release had to be done outside of the Canadian Access to Info Act because of time constraints that the Act would not allow for. And the reason being, permission was needed from Ottawa, from every Canadian provincial capital, and from Washington, D.C., because it showed our working relationship with foreign powers when it came to these matters. These matters including, by the way, UAP investigations. The master plan is a policy that outlines the rules and procedures for the recovery of space junk, dangerous debris, and unknown objects from space. It's meant to be applied and adhered to when any of the aforementioned items crash within Canadian territory, and we require control and recovery efforts which employ both Canadian and US personnel and resources working together. This policy established the framework and command structure, basically who's in charge and who makes the decisions in debris fields. Some examples from the master plan include who's in charge on the scene, the fact that any bona fide US agency can request and expect an RCMP escort to take them to wherever they want within Canada. Recommendations are also included as to how far to keep staff and the public away when radiation is involved. The master plan also deals with how to handle and when to remove casualties. Sample scripts are included showing you how to deal with the media. The master plan determined, for example, how joint US and Canadian forces interacted with each other in 1978. There was a 600-kilometer long debris field when the Soviet nuclear satellite Cosmos 954 crashed in the Canadian high Arctic. That mission was dubbed Operation Morning Light. How the two teams worked together was all determined by that master plan. Retired RCMP staff had told me how they would sometimes have to check with headquarters as to whether or not the space object contingency plan would come into play when investigating purported UAP landing cases. This was the case, for example, for one in the 90s in Prince Edward Island. Recently, new evidence and witness testimony regarding the October 467 Shag Harbor incident indicates that the master plan was disregarded by the Canadian Coast Guard Service. It seems that a former lighthouse keeper was ordered to retrieve and secure an artifact that he found upon Bon Portage Island during a foot patrol he carried out the morning after the incident. The object was believed to possibly be either debris from the Shag Harbor UFO or UAP, or a sensor device that had been deployed to help locate and analyze the mysterious craft responsible for this famous incident. The lightkeeper was then instructed to pack up the item, deliver it to the nearby mainland, and hand it over to US Navy personnel, which he did. The air desk at D&D headquarters in Ottawa was Canada's equivalent at the time of the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book in the 1960s. They should have been considered the lead agency by all involved with the initial military search. However, no one at D&D HQ was ever consulted or informed of the discovery or the disposition of the Bon Portage Island artifact. Years later, a US Navy geodesic survey marker was discovered near where the artifact was retrieved. The code on the face indicates a place where an object of extreme interest was found. As Squadron Leader William Bain, who served at the air desk, told me in a face-to-face interview, I believe that we were stick-handled by the Americans in Shag Harbor. So does the Pentagon's UAP preliminary report amount to disclosure? Maybe, but just with a small d. I'd like to take the opportunity here right now to thank Jan Vadnais and the Garpan UFO group for their invitation to present my thoughts regarding the release of the preliminary assessment of UAP by the U.S. Office of the DNI. Thank you.
My name is Richard. I am the president of UFO BC. We are a nonprofit entity located in Western Canada that investigates and documents UFO-related activity in the province of British Columbia and the Yukon territories. I've been asked to provide a very quick comment on the UAP release recently done by the US military and what it has as an effect on UFO and UAP studies as a whole worldwide. For the last 70 years, researchers have tried, unfortunately in vain, to break the scientific barrier that exists, the negative dogma, the negative stereotypes that exist when doing and being a part of UFO research. Unfortunately, any individual who's dared research UFO activity has been labeled a charlatan, a quack, crazy pseudoscientist. any proper scientists that have managed to somehow transition between a scientific life and academic life and investigating UFOs have been ridiculed. As you can see behind me, part of my UFO book collection, this has been an attempt over the last 70 years to push this research into mainstream acceptability of the scientific community. So there's a hope of myself and of my colleagues at UFO BC, this recent acceptance and questioning done by the US military in terms of what are they, will allow and open up for proper scientific analysis and proper scientific rigor be applied to the study of UFO phenomenon without any bias, without any ridicule. It will truly, hopefully, allow all researchers, scientific and otherwise, a proper method, a proper means to simply ask the question, what are they?
The universe put us together to collaborate, something that I think everybody should do. Collaboration is important. So Jacques, do you want to start how you started with me on this?
Well, as you know, I had been interested in the physical aspects of the phenomenon for a long time. Of course, I work in Silicon Valley with people who are very interested in the entire phenomenon and are willing to help with laboratory equipment, with skills, and with bringing in other disciplines into this. And I had been with a couple of friends. We had been digging up some sites in New Mexico, not at this particular site, but at another site near Dayton, and which had been kept very confidential for a long time. And we did find some material that intrigued us. And then one of these friends told me that there was another case, in that particular area, near San Antonio, and a little village called San Antonito, which is actually fairly close to Socorro. So there was a correlation of things. And unfortunately, at the time, I couldn't really go to that particular site. And then I discovered that Paula had done all this research already. So we started collaborating and bringing together both the testimony that she had already recorded of Remy Baca, who had just passed away, and Jose Padilla, who was the 9-year-old who had been on site. And we started going to the site together and gathering all the data that we could on that case.
Yeah, I'd like to say the book is wonderfully written. I feel like I'm at the Owl Bar and Cafe when I'm reading it. It's excellent. But to start off, we have a 1945 crash retrieval, or cases with the, you have these kids as witnesses. And an interesting quote here you have from the book, it says, it had taken place here precisely 1 month after the first nuclear explosion in history, as if a direct response to it.
The case has been mentioned in a few other books. Timothy Good in particular, Ryan Wood, have mentioned it. I think in Ryan Wood's book, there's several pages dedicated to the case. So the case had been noticed before, in the literature, but people hadn't paid much attention because first, it was 2 kids. It wasn't as sexy as Roswell. And also, it was a very well-kept secret. And the secret was very well kept from 2 different directions. There was a crash, or rather a controlled landing by a very, very interesting craft that was taken away by the Army. The Army was on the spot because this was within the White Sands area where the first atomic bomb had just been tested. Okay, so the Army was on the spot right away. They recovered the craft and they took it away. And it was never mentioned again anywhere. The other part of the secret was the kids. The kids were terrified by what they had seen once they realized that this was not an airplane and it certainly wasn't a weather balloon. They had recovered some artifacts that we have now, that we are studying and taking apart. Very interesting artifacts, but the Army was clearly aware that there was something missing from what they had recovered, and they were trying to find out where it was. So the kids remained silent. Roswell happened, Kenneth Arnold happened, all of this happened, and they never spoke. So there were only a few leaks, a few mentions very recently that resulted in the quotes that were in a few books. But everybody by then was fascinated with Roswell, that attracted all the media attention, and for good reason. But all the hypotheses that have been made about Roswell are either informed or are challenged by what we found when we interviewed the witnesses, of 1945. The case is unique, and for me, I've been criticized for not paying enough attention to crashes, and I acknowledge that I stayed away from that because I wanted to stay with cases where I had access to the witnesses, I had access to the site. New Mexico and all these other crashes, and I used to discuss it with Alan Hynek, of course, when I worked with him for many years. You could never really get to the witness. It was always some anonymous person who might have seen some cadaver somewhere, or knew the doctor, but the doctor had died. And yes, it was very interesting. We used to discuss that, to read those reports, with Alan Hynek, but there was nothing no place where we could really go to really get the hard information. Thanks to a few researchers, mainly in New Mexico, but also elsewhere, there is now a body of evidence that can be reviewed, and some samples that can be taken to the lab. So that's why I got back into this. And this particular case with Paola was really a great opportunity to do some real science.
Even though the Tic Tac seems to be, from an outside observer, seems to be moving at, say, 20,000 miles an hour, it's not generating any friction. Like when a rocket comes into the Earth's atmosphere, you get a re-entry problem and it heats up. That doesn't happen with Tic Tac. See, that doesn't happen with the Tic Tac. The way warp drive is, it's like surfing on a wave. The wave is the curvature of space, the rippling of space. So the surfer is not really moving relative to the water he's around. He's moving with the water. That's the way the Tic Tac moves. But it's controlling the way the space is warping. See, it's controlling its path. And it does it with small amounts of energy. So the hardest thing for people to understand is that when you see a flying saucer or a Tic Tac, it's not an ordinary vehicle that's moving through air. It's controlling the gravitational field right around its fuselage. For example, if the Tic Tac wants to move to the east, let's say, if it moves to the east, what it does, it's able to contract the space in its nose and expand the space in its tail. It's folding space, sitting still in space, really. But to the outside observer, it looks as if it's moving.
In his scientific paper, Is Low-Power Warp Drive Possible?, Dr. Jack Sarfati posits the idea that quantum metamaterials may be used to produce low-power warp, while staying true to Einstein's general and special theories of relativity. Dr. Sarfati believes he's discovered a workable way to fold space-time.
Warp drive is just a very elementary application of Einstein's general theory of relativity of the gravitational field. And Einstein's field equations basically show how you can use an applied electromagnetic field, like a source, a pump, and from that electromagnetic field, you can generate a gravitational field. The problem has been that the coupling between the electromagnetic input field and the induced gravitational output field is very weak. I found a way to make it very strong. So that's simply it. Using what are called metamaterials. Metamaterials are artificially made. They're made by man. They don't exist naturally in nature. They're just like lattices of artificial atoms. We make these artificial atoms. They're called meta-atoms. The various ways of making them, I won't go into detail. And we just construct them like they're like a neural network. It's like lattices, like crystals. And these artificial atoms are at definite positions in the crystals. And they have extraordinary electromagnetic properties. When we impose electricity, so in magnetic fields, in the metamaterials, they could go into what are called certain resonance states, and they can generate strong gravitational fields. So the metamaterials is a way of generating inside the metamaterial a strong gravity field from a very weak electromagnetic field. I've discovered, along with other physicists, mainly Keith Wanza, full professor of physics, Cal State Fullerton, we think we know, in principle, how to increase the coupling between electromagnetism and gravity in order to control the gravity field with electromagnetism, using small amounts of energy. The trick is, in metamaterials, we can make the effective speed of light very tiny, and by doing that, we increase the coupling between electricity and magnetism and the gravitational field it creates. So that's the trick. We're playing with the electromagnetic properties of metamaterial to amplify the effect of the input electromagnetic field on the gravitational field it creates. We can then, with theoretical physics, take a tic-tac doing a certain maneuver, and then from that we can calculate what kind of gravitational field is required to do that. And then how much energy do we have available? And then we can design a metamaterial that'll do it. You know, but it's a complicated thing, but with teams of scientists we can do it.
That raises the question, how fundamental are metamaterials to understanding how UAPs maneuver?
It explains how those things work. It's pretty elementary, actually. But once you have the right idea, everything falls in place. There's no mystery. I am saying there's no mystery as how this technology fundamentally works. There's no mystery. It's just now a matter of engineering development of the right kinds of materials that we could use to amplify the effect of electromagnetism in creating a gravitational field. That explains the close encounters of the USS Nimitz, the Roosevelt, and apparently many other close encounters that are still classified. The machine itself is a conscious entity. So the hull, the fuselage of Tic Tac, is a special kind of metamaterial, which also, it turns out, is a conscious computer. It's a conscious artificial intelligence, artificial neural network. The metamaterial is kind of like the brain, like neurons in a brain, the metamaterial. So the metamaterial, it can generate a strong gravitational field, and it also generates consciousness.
This is the international academic and civilian ufological community's response to the Pentagon, US government, and UAP task force.
We are privileged to have the presentation here of Sir Professor Rogero Maria Santilli.
Thank you, Professor Bosman. I am really appreciated this interview. I have been always very much interested in the UFO phenomena, to such an extent that I can use the word excited. Myself, my wife, and my two children, Luisa and Hermano. And then we had a very close encounter in the top of the mountain in the central Apennine in Italy in 1983. And so I saw, and this was a close encounter with missing time. So I saw indeed the UFO very close by. And so therefore I have my personal view regarding certain aspects. They essentially stem out It's just they originated from this direct view.
I understand that it impacted your own physics work.
Yes, my first impression is that absolutely I do not believe that this machine originated from they are humans. No, the only way to represent the complexity of what I saw is that the only way this, in my view, is credible is that there are machines coming from a civilization at least millions of years ahead of us. So we're talking about civilization that in comparison, our knowledge is zero. It's knowledge so small to be potentially insignificant or very little relevance. This is number one. Number two, I saw a number of phenomena that are hardly believable, but I saw them. One of the points that really attracted me, all my attention as a geometer to study geometry, is something reported also by other eyewitnesses, namely that the object was relatively small, namely the size of a pickup truck or the size of our car, for a passenger car. But there is a report that when abducted people are abducted, enter into the spacecraft, then they see a large structure with numerous rooms and so on. So this stimulated my imagination, and I worked for a considerable period of time to identify a geometry that could at least represent in an embryonical way such an incredible behavior. And the conclusion was that essentially the entire mathematics that I know was mostly inapplicable or basically insufficient. In other words, the complexity of the UFO phenomena is so great, so immensely beyond our imagination, that sure, with our current mathematics, certainly we can initiate the study of the UFO phenomenon. It's the only thing that we can do at this moment. Any effort is recommendable, etc., etc. However, we have to be objective and admit that this will be grossly insufficient. And I had the same problem for the primary task of in my life, and that is the proof of the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen argument that quantum mechanics is not a complete theory, end of quote. I wrote several papers and books for the proper completion of quantum mechanics, and the outcome was essentially the same. There was no possibility of achieving a completion of consistent completion of quantum mechanics before first constructing a generalization of the 20th century mathematics that I call isomathematics. I believe this is a crucial point for any study of the UFO phenomena that has a chance, at least of passing the test of time. I'm referring to the use of more appropriate mathematics. The same occurs for the representation of this incredible phenomenon, in which you see from the outside a relatively small craft, and abductees enter inside and see rooms after rooms after rooms, which is a very mysterious and fascinating problem. This is represented numerically by the isogeometry to produce incontrovertible evidence that we have alien machine. One of the proposals was published by MUFON of Massachusetts. I believe it will be included in the list of website of Lisa Ling at the end of this interview. One of the proposals was to drop in a landing site, to drop a highly sensitive chronometer, and then keep the twin chronometer outside, and then wait for at least a few hours, and then compare the two chronometers. The prediction of isogeometry is the following: that in the event the chronometer has been placed in sufficiently soon after the landing, then must show the prediction must show a difference in time when compared with the external chronometer. That even if we see a spaceship, what do we mean we see the UFO? We see it with our light. Our light bounces back and through our eyes. But this absolutely does not mean that UFO is in our time. No, absolutely. Can be 1,000 years ahead or in the past. It turns out that a spaceship that is capable of, which is composed by equal amount of matter and antimatter, so that this civilization millions of years ahead of us is capable of maintaining matter and antimatter together, then that is called technically called iso self-dual equipment. Then that machine can indeed travel in time because it has no proper time, because the total time of the machine is zero.
Hello, my name is Chris Rutkowski. I'm a science writer, and I've written about UFOs and related phenomena for quite a number of years. I have 10 books out about the subject. Now recently, an unidentified aerial phenomenon task force initiated by the Pentagon in the United States produced a report that got a lot of people excited. And it seems to really concentrate interest on UFOs, received a significant amount of media attention. And yet, my reading of the report has it suggest that it's more of a Rorschach test about what's going on in ufology today. For those who believe that UFOs are some sort of real and extraterrestrial phenomenon, the report leaves that possibility open. In fact, the report suggests that some cases that the task force examined during the course of its study, which was not long, admittedly, seem to suggest something other than terrestrial intervention. And yet, to those who are skeptical or really doubt that UFOs are anything to worry about, the reports seem to suggest that's a possibility as well. Out of 144 cases that the task force examined, it said that only one had an explanation. And yet, to some people where this suggests that the majority of the cases had no explanations, the report actually says, if you read it, that the problem with the cases is that they didn't have enough good information to make a definitive analysis, and that the cases were all of insufficient information. And that's something we encounter every day with the Canadian UFO Survey, which has been running for more than 30 years, where we have more than 20,000 cases reported in Canada, and yet only a significantly small number of these are unexplained because so many have insufficient information. The good news is the report suggests that there's ongoing research, that they want to continue to study and want to know what it is that the military pilots have been seeing, and it also suggests that science and the scientific community is going to play a role in trying to solve the mystery of UFOs. It's interesting. It is very reminiscent of what happened during the 1960s with Project Blue Book and the Condon Report. Is this a rehash of something we've seen already, or is this something that's really going to help us understand the UFO phenomenon? It remains to be seen.
Bonjour, je suis José Bouillon. Je suis enquêteur ufologique et j'ai créé le mouvement Dark Ufologie en 1995. Depuis un bon nombre d'années déjà, les objets volants non identifiés sont de plus en plus pris au sérieux par les gouvernements. D'ailleurs, avant d'entamer cette petite présentation de ma part, il est important de rappeler que les études sur les phénomènes non identifiés se sont imposées aujourd'hui comme un sujet majeur dans de nombreux pays, et plus particulièrement en France, où l'on pourrait déjà noter le rapport Cometa, qui avait fait d'ailleurs grand bruit au sein de la communauté internationale. La France, donc, n'est pas la dernière de la classe en matière de divulgation ufologique, bien au contraire. Car nous pouvons citer là encore la plus grande vague de manifestations OVNI qui s'est déroulée sur notre territoire national en 1954, avec pas moins plus de 20 000 témoignages recensés par des enquêteurs, bien souvent accompagnés de rapports de gendarmerie. Depuis lors, la confiance du grand public s'est installée progressivement dans notre pays avec une certitude profonde pour sa réalité. Au fil des années, des cas majeurs se sont venus se greffer à une liste déjà longue sur ces étranges phénomènes observés en France. Nous pouvons citer ici quelques affaires troublantes qui ont été recensées, comme par exemple avec le cas de Marius de Wilde, l'affaire des Amarantes, le cas de Valençade, et j'en passe. Donc, à cette question qui m'est posée, est-ce que je m'attends à ce que le Pentagone nous fasse de grandes révélations sur les ovnis? Je répondrai simplement que l'histoire en elle-même nous en a déjà largement assez apprises pour en comprendre que les ovnis en sont quelque chose de réel, pour en attendre quoi que ce soit de ce côté-là d'ailleurs. Et de toute évidence, qu'est-ce que cela changera-t-il au problème? Rien. D'ailleurs, je vous ai déjà pris au mot depuis bien longtemps déjà, car il y a quelques années de cela, j'ai divulgué ces photographies dont moi seul en possède les originaux. D'ailleurs, j'ai attendu un certain nombre d'années avant de pouvoir le dire et de divulguer toute cette histoire, incroyable mais véridique. Un cas bien de chez vous, qui a été classé par l'ufologie mondiale comme une affaire authentique, juste derrière celle de Roswell. Mais aujourd'hui, il est temps de prendre vos responsabilités vis-à-vis du grand public. Car, avant d'arriver ici en Europe, dans mes mains, ces photos étaient bien gentiment rangées dans un de vos placards secrets. Donc, arrêtez de distribuer à la face du monde des pseudo-révélations, alors que vos placards regorgeant de véritables trésors qui tendent vers une réalité sans équivoque du phénomène. Sinon, d'autres ufologues comme moi y reviendront pour s'y servir. Non pas pour vous prendre à défaut d'ailleurs, mais bel et bien pour vous pousser à divulguer les secrets que vous nous cachez depuis bien trop longtemps déjà.
Rich Sheck's response is a summary of 3 articles that he has written on the subject matter. Top ufologists ignore continuing CIA role in UFO cover-up by Rich Sheck.
As best as I can surmise, all the top ufologists have missed the continuing role of the CIA in covering up the UFO phenomenon. None of them seem to have noticed that the unclassified portion of the UAP task force did not include input from the CIA, which is notorious for having a separate reporting system from the Air Force and other agencies tracking UFOs. I see no reason for anyone to believe that there is a sincere attempt by any of these players to end the 75-year-old truth embargo or to provide the unwashed masses genuine insight into what is occurring in our skies. My sense is that we are witnessing another highly sophisticated psychological operation that puts forth a tight official narrative that does little more than tease the public's appetite for the truth while setting the foundation for a blue beam type false flag operation or perhaps even an alien salvation event. I remain deeply puzzled and saddened at the lack of insight by these top ufologists regarding the absence of the CIA input and what it portends to those committed to complete disclosure of all relevant data. This observer is also perplexed by the lack of comments pertaining to what appears to be an admission that the government uses ET technology in the leaked memo to Richard Dolan. I consider that a backhanded, limited hangout form of disclosure, but I'm currently alone in my assessment. UFOs on Ending False Official Narratives by Rich Sheck. Analysis. The leaked 8 types of advanced propulsion system in the classified portion of the UFO UAP report appears to have eschewed any input from the CIA. That fact alone renders it highly suspect as a threshold matter. The CIA has played a major role in the UFO disinformation campaign as part of a psychological operation to intentionally confuse the public. Response to Richard Dolan. Regarding your comments about the leaked info, you seem to endorse the official narrative position in the unclassified portion that the technology is not ours. I disagree and see the leak confirming that the crafts are ours when it says prototypes of flying crafts are being flown at Area 51. Where do we go from here? Congressional hearings may occur unless there is a false flag event, and by that I mean a new pandemic, blue beam attack, war with Russia and or China, environmental crisis, civil war, etc., to deflect attention away from disclosure. If hearings are held, I think they should discuss the legitimacy of private corporations controlling secrets and profiting from the technology that the public funds and that impacts national security. I have long promoted a Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a viable mechanism for dealing with the unending criminality of the MIC. That is perhaps the only way to restore legitimacy to our profoundly corrupt government that can perpetuate its abuse of power through special access projects and NDAs to hide behind the secrecy that empowers them. Is UAP Task Force report so thin because it lacks input from the CIA? By Rich Check. After so much hype in the run-up to last month's release of the UAP Task Force report on UFOs, the much ballyhooed final result was a mere 17-page classified account of the mysterious phenomenon. Is that because there was apparently no official input from the CIA, which has played a major role in cover-up and truth embargo of 75 years since Roswell? Or perhaps it's so slim for the exact opposite reason. It is in fact the product of the CIA, which wants to continue fooling the public with mis- or disinformation as part of their continuing psychological operation regarding this too-hot-to-handle topic that requires maximum secrecy. Of course, in the one page that was leaked or planted, summary of the classified portion that top ufologist Mr. Richard Dolan received a few days later, there is the implicit admission that ET technology is being used by the U.S. and that some of the observed crafts are relying on advanced technology to propel prototypes being tested over Nevada. A growing populist movement has emerged that is designed to bypass the secrecy forged by MIC, which has populated public examination of this topic with so much confusion and needless agony. If it is the CIA behind all of this, it is essential that their role be revealed to all who are entitled to the truth.
Hello, I'm Alfred Lamberwalt Weber with my International Academic Civilian Ufological Community's response to the Pentagon U.S. government's UAP Task Force report. My summary response is GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So why do we say that? GIGO, here is from the report. Quote, we were unable to identify one reported UAP. We were able to identify one reported UAP with high confidence. In that case, we identified the object as a large deflating balloon. Give me a break. The others remained unexplained. Quote, 144 reports originated from US government sources. Of these, 80 reports involved observation with multiple sensors. Most reports described UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, UFOs, as objects that interrupted pre-planned training or other military activity. That is the definition of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. You select garbage as the universe that you study and you get garbage out. And that's from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Preliminary Assessment, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, July 25th, 2021. There is the link. You have the Director of National Intelligence, you have the Pentagon, and you have the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Well, let's go to a program that has been under the Secretary of Defense, under the CIA, that the Director of the National Intelligence Program has known about for at least 50 years, since 1983, where they had workshops for it at the College of the Siskiyous. And that is the US Mars colony, where approximately 60 million humans were sent, according to some. And this is, there we have a photograph of US astronaut, Mars astronaut, yes, part of the astronaut program to the Mars colony, Ken Johnston Sr. And this is part of the disclosure that I myself have done on Exopolitics TV. There you can see the link. You can see it on Omniverse TV. There you can see the link. The third wave of Mars explorers go public. U.S. Mars explorer and chrononaut, Andy Bishago. NASA Mars astronaut, Ken Johnston. Mars explorer, Karen Christine Patrick. Mars explorer, Brett Collins Shepard. What? The third wave of Mars explorers go public. When? On Saturday, February 10th, 2018 at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Mountain, 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. GMT, 10 p.m. Central, February 11th, 5 a.m. Hong Kong time, 8 a.m. Melbourne, Australia time. This is a worldwide event. Who? The Mars Anomaly Research Society, former U.S. chrononaut, Andrew Bishago, chairman, president, and I'm the chairman and co-founder, and members of the Mars Jumper program circa 1980, namely civilian astronaut consultant pilot Ken Johnston Sr., Karen Christine Patrick, Brent Collins Shepard. And this is part of the Mars Anomaly Research Society at projectmars.net. And you can find this at Facebook. And why? To share the total context of Exopolitics TV's exposure. So here we have a Mars Anomaly Research Society, former U.S. chrononaut and Mars explorers, civilian astronaut consultant, Ken Johnston Sr., Brett Collins Shepard, Karen Christine Patrick, all of whom now have thankfully broken through and recovered their memories of active service in the U.S. secret program on the U.S. facilities and bases on our neighboring planet Mars and going public. The modus operandi of the U.S. secret Mars program, including public Mars Corporation, was a pervasive use of mind control to include amnesia. This is the truth of the, it involves tremendous use of, there are the facilities on Mars. These are Martian UFOs that come to Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Facility. Now I see that I have reached my 6-minute limit, so we're going to stop recording right there. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the government of the United States, military officers of the United States Department of Defense, members of the media, and the international press. On June 24, 2020, the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, SSCI, Standing Committee passed a request that the intelligence community and the Department of Defense release information about their UFO records. This request became effective by the National Defense Authorization Act of the year 2021, worth $740 billion, which was voted by the House of Representatives on December 29, 2020, and by the Senate on January 1st, 2021. Following this announcement, the community of academic researchers on UFOs, and also all interested and passionate people on this mysterious subject, expected that the UAP task force report to the Senate committee 6 months later, in June 2021, as stipulated. However, this directive was not respected because only the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released on June 25th a preliminary report of barely 7 pages. For qualified and experienced professionals like you, Honorable Representative, it is obvious that this deception is explained by either a blatant lack of professionalism or by a political maneuver with suspicious goals. And since the Director of National Intelligence is chosen by the President, that may give a clue to an attitude change from the recent Biden administration on this topic. During the press conference that follows, you will hear the enlightened opinions of some 30 UFO scholars and specialists from a dozen countries. You will learn that academic researchers and other independent investigators are also not satisfied with this surprising official statement. However, the series of major blunders on the part of the United States on the subject of UFOs and the conquest of space do not date from yesterday. As much the pros and cons of the reality of these phenomena have been officially declared over the past 7 decades, from the famous US Air Force study projects of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, to the revelations of insider and former employees of the last few decades. As the co-organizer of this press conference, I too would like to raise a few criticisms. My name is Jan Vadne, and I'm the director of GARPAN, a highly active research group in Canada since 2012. I am mainly a university researcher who works concretely to recognize the different horizons, perspectives, and traditions of studies involved in UFO and UAP research. The problem with UFOs, and this is the caution I want to share, is that ufology can and should be understood in many ways. We must therefore reason with a philosopher like Aristotle and accept the polysemy of this term consecrated by popular culture. It is necessary to consider the different objects reported by the witnesses to actually belong strictly to distinct fields of studies. The preliminary report of June 25, 2021 gives an overview by specifying that the types of UFOs are categorized according to 5 possible explanations. First, there is airborne clutter, which is radar. Second, there are natural atmospheric phenomena. Third, there are US government and US industry developmental programs. Fourth, foreign adversary systems. And last, other. 2 things stand out from this list. Point 3 implies that the United States government or certain American industries possess unconventional, unrecognized technologies. Point 4, there are legitimate reasons to suspect that this could also be the case of foreign nations. As an experienced UFO investigator and researcher, however, allow me to disabuse you. Rather, you may have to look at it this way. Misunderstands can be both human and technical and fall within the investigative field of ufology, which many amateur groups deal with. Natural phenomena of scientific interest do not relate only to meteorology, but also to geology, oceanography, optics, etc. In this regard, we refer to the Catalogue of Scientific Anomalies established by William Corliss. Points 3 and 4 merge. Of course, militarily, they must be distinguished, but in both cases, we are dealing with machines. Item 5, other, corresponds very well to the actual UFOs, and it is a term that has often been used to catalog them. However, research on UFOs has highlighted the existence of 2 intriguing and controversial phenomena. A phenomenon which primarily interests anthropologists, folklorists, mythologists, but also philosophers and phenomenologists. There is an intelligence perhaps the psyche of the witnesses themselves, actually interacting with the consciousness of the witnesses and can be, in part, conditioned by the environment. A few rare cases of UFOs reasonably admit the plausibility of the hypothesis of an extraterrestrial origin. This is the area of futurology and communication protocols. For example, the Declaration of Principles concerning activities following the detection of extraterrestrial intelligence, adopted by the International Academy of Astronautics, the IAA. Certainly, the military first seeks to determine if there is a threat, but that should not preclude offering the answer-hungry public a cohesive and comprehensive picture of the phenomena associated with UFOs. The military and conscientious leaders are probably right to apprehend an emerging threat. But instead of aliens from the cosmos, who are long in coming, we risk being confronted very soon with new players on the global geopolitical scene, because artificial intelligence is already producing superhuman intelligence. And when the report states that the initial objective will be to employ artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms to group and recognize similarities and patterns in the characteristics of the data points, referring to the Senate Report 116/233, there is a good reason. Section 505 informs us that the Director of National Intelligence must perform an assessment of export controls related to artificial intelligence, AI, microchips, advanced manufacturing equipment, and other AI-based technologies. And in the committee's comments, point 3, of this Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021, we are informed about the Department of Defense Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team Plan. The goal of this team is to integrate unsupervised artificial intelligence algorithms, for example, algorithms that learn from data without being trained, allowing artificial intelligence to improve, into Project Maven. In short, the framework of this preliminary report is too narrow. The number of cases is already minimal, 144 between 2004 and 2021, mostly during the last 2 years. Additionally, the report says most reports describe UAP as objects that interrupt pre-planned training or other military activity, tend to cluster around US training and testing grounds, admitting that this constitutes a bias to their analysis. Finally, I present a third criticism as a university researcher in history. The preliminary report does not postulate any historical perspective, speaks as if there had never been any studies on UFOs before, and do not refer to any UFO cases from other countries. When it is stated on page 4 that no standardized reporting mechanism existed until the Navy established one in March 2019, this is false. As much in the United States as in many countries, procedures for reporting unidentified sightings have existed for over half a century. On the other hand, if the US Navy has established such a protocol for UFO reporting, why is it not talking about USOs, unidentified submarine objects? Nevertheless, the proposal to revise all of the Army's radar archives using the computational capabilities of AI is a very good idea. In conclusion, one can only have mixed feeling about this incomplete report, too short, faulty, and without historical insight. Faced with this awkwardness on such a controversial and explosive subject, we advise that any major announcements regarding UFOs from the military should be supported by a committee made up of philosophers, sociologists, political scientists, anthropologists, etc., as well as scientists and engineers working on these objects. This cultural precaution would make it possible to better coordinate an intelligent and organized reception of the data to be shared. To judge the quality of the coming full report, I suggest, Honorable Representative of the American people, that you, in the meantime, consult the recent 377-page report of the 3AF Sigma 2 Commission, written by the Aeronautical and Astronautical Association of France, precisely in anticipation of the publication of your Department of Defense report. You will find a very good comparative example. Rigorous research on UFOs exists, and it is relevant in many ways. It should not be diverted from their scientific aims in order to gain political capital, to manipulate the public, or to carry out disinformation campaigns. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, members of the defense intelligence community and US government, as well as the control group, oversight. We have had a lifetime of saturation in research of the UFO phenomenon, as well as interactions. I accepted the invitation of Jan Vatnes of Garpan in January to co-create this press conference with him due to the academic procedures and the academic mindedness that he wants to apply to ufology and has applied with the second Canadian Conference on Academic Canadian Ufology in October of 2018, which had a scientific steering committee, and it was peer reviewed. So with a lifetime of philosophical meditation, introspection, retrospection on the phenomenon, we have come to our realization that we wanted to bring this into more academic formats. So we engaged in the Alps of Switzerland and Austria, in Italy, dialogues with the cosmos, which we now call dialogues with UAPs, where we brought in technical equipment that has never been used before. And the idea with dialogues is to engage biofeedback protocols that are objective, that are part of the research community of biological sustained coherent states of heart and mind, and then focus on establishing a dialogue. We've had great success. The UFO comes. We have measurements that are unique and that demonstrate that there is an engageable dialogue and an alphabet of reactions to consciousness and or to equipment. And we will continue with that work through television to document it with brand new technologies. In the retrospect, the idea that this is extraterrestrial is impossible for us. This goes way beyond that. Last year, in September 2020, as an associative professor in the division of the Philosophical Sciences of the Institute of Basic Research, Palm Harbor, Florida, I was invited as that associative professor to give the mystical implications of the restoration of Einstein determinism, such as two-particle physics, as I'd been studying a brand new branch of science called hadronic mechanics that the Institute for Basic Research is spearheading and pioneering. We appeared as an associative professor in the philosophical sciences for the Institute of Basic Research in the EPR debates of last year. That's the Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen debates, an international teleconference where a brand new branch of science was brought into focus in the world. And so that's where our philosophical or mystical implications were introduced. We drew from this brand new branch of physics that completes the insufficiencies of quantum mechanics. So we gave a presentation on this brand new science, which dealt with a total entanglement of space in the hadronic horizon hyperdense media and a complementary total entanglement of all time, which gives implication to a cosmic superintelligence. The superintelligence hypothesis is able to deduce or deal with the UFO contact data. For instance, Harvard psychologist Dr. John Mack found that many of those who were having experienced contacts, regular contacts and interactions with the UFO intelligence would undergo transformations in themselves, and then the physical phenomenon would also change. So there is an extra component to this. The contact phenomena, of course, is a bit further down the line. This is the next series of phases up ahead. There are many who have been contacted. Some have a close encounters of the third kind. Others have repeated cycles of interactions. I've had those, and I know many who have had. And out of curiosity and fascination, I compare and look through the whole fields. We are not dealing with a set cluster of humanoid-like encounters or descriptions like the Greys, the Nordics, the hairy dwarfs. When you look at the databases from around the world, you have myriads of varieties of humanoids. So this does not fit the bill. There are commonalities between them, which is interesting. Likewise, the UFO can vary from miles in size to small spheres of light or to shape-shifting objects and everything in between. There are wide varieties. So this is beyond the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So Dr. John Mack would take these experiences and bring them through transpersonal psychology to deal with spiritual crises. The same beings would come, but in different form. The ship would change in form. And so with the procedures. And in a few cases, what had been a small gray apparent extraterrestrial turned into a sphere of light that joined a nexus of light. Superintelligence hypothesis stipulates that there is a cosmic superintelligence that is so massive that if we would encounter it in its fullness, it would blow our sensory apparatus. Therefore, it uses modules of interface. It synthesizes realities. Some of these might be part of our psychosomatic hologram understanding of reality, our perceptual understanding, our perceptual hologram. Others, physical synthesis of realities that can have different degrees of time for being a reality. And there are many examples of this which we give elsewhere. So modules may apply to whole groups of people over many decades or generations. But the module idea is like a graphic operating system. The modules are like icons of an operating system, and that operating system is superintelligence. Dr. Jack Sarfati, who has been working on the metamaterials that have been retrieved from UFOs, has indicated that the metamaterials is able to embed the universal field of consciousness, and therefore these UFOs are conscious. This is very different to the artificial intelligence. This is an embeddedness of the field of universal consciousness. Likewise, the complex metamaterials composing the cytoskeleton, the cellular skeleton, the microtubules, which is a geometrical, perfected series of metamaterials embedded, enables the field, the universal field of consciousness, to be embedded. So it is the same field that's being embedded. Again, this universal field of consciousness we would align to superintelligence. Superintelligence engaging the human race, and through the different modules is able to steer socially, as Dr. Jacques Vallée has pointed out with his hyperdimensional hypothesis, which has complementary elements to this. So the contacts appear real to the experiencer. There may be physical components that are then measurable, but they are different degrees of modules that have been created. And there have been testimonies also of Master Sergeant from the National Reconnaissance Organization, Daniel Salter, that the bodies that have been retrieved, he was part of a retrieval operation, are synthesized bodies from a other form of light intelligence that makes bodies from local solar system materials. So superintelligence theory or hypothesis, to broaden the questions we can only just begin to ask. We would add that the superintelligence hypothesis with modules will encompass all aspects, including the contact information, including patterns within UFO encounters, including encounters that often are parallel, where the subject goes out of the body, has an out-of-body experience whilst in a contact, and where the entities are also on that particular level. So a module that encompasses various states concurrently, and the information content that is given is all part of this graphic interface to superintelligence. Dialogues with UAPs up ahead, and the academic process being utilized to the full spectrum of ufology. Thank you.
The international scientific community has always been hostile with respect to the UFO problem for two reasons. The first, that it seems to contradict the law of physics. In effect, many witnesses said they saw UFO moving at supersonic velocity in complete silence. Specialists in fluid mechanics said it was impossible. A strong shock wave should occur with a big boom. As a consequence, this object do not exist. Another argument against a visit of aliens is the travel time. The nearest star is at a distance of 4-year light. At the tenth of the speed of light, it would take 80 years to make a round trip. According to the result of the observation of the 10th past year, we could expect to find 1 million of star systems in our galaxy, the Milky Way, surrounded by a set of planets, and one of these planets could host life and even intelligent creatures. Today, it's no longer reasonable to think that we are alone in the universe. So that the scientists say today, okay, we're not alone, but the aliens are so far away that cannot visit us. As a comment, I will first say that there is a technique called magneto-hydrodynamics. With this MHD, we have a very strong action on a gas through Lorentz force field. In France, we have made a lot of work at the end of the 60s until the beginning of the 90s. These works were both theoretical and experimental, and we have shown that we could remove the shockwave by Lorentz force field action. But perhaps these works appeared too early. We got no funding to develop these things in gases. In fact, in great secrecy, the Russians did it. In fact, they own hypersonic craft cruising at Mach 10 up to 30. They must have a system to prevent the birth of the shockwave. If not, the rise of temperature behind the shockwave would vaporize these crafts. This cancels the argument of the scientists when they say that UFO could not fly at such velocity in air. Okay, but what about the interstellar travels, where MHD cannot afford? A new cosmological model is required. We have developed a new cosmological we call Janus. By the way, that new model was required because since the 70s, cosmology is in big crisis. The lambda CDM model is like a house of cards because we can't find dark matter and dark energy. In the Janus model, negative mass replaces very well these two components. All that has been published in a series of papers in peer-reviewed journal top level. Negative mass produces the acceleration of the expansion of the universe. For more precision, this is a negative mass antimatter. This negative mass confines the galaxy and the clusters of galaxies. There is a special feature. If a vehicle can reverse its mass, considering a distance between two distant points, the distances are shortened by a factor 100, and the velocity of light of negative energy photon is 10 times higher, so that the travel time is shortened by a factor 1000. Then, in such new framework, interstellar travels become non-impossible. When the craft gets its negative mass, it emits negative energy photons that we cannot see. It seems to disappear. Reversely, when it reverses its mass again, it seems to appear from nothing. You know that the astrophysicist Avi Loeb has just created the Galileo project, and we are ready to come and to present our works in front of the scientific committee. We just show that the today's tools of our science can have a hold on the UFO phenomenon. From my opinion, among the many species who visit us, there probably are some that are advanced with respect to us by some hundreds years only. They know that we are very close to understand and to enter the interstellar club, and that's for they visit us. This is the address of a video in which we present our work in MHD and cosmology.
My name is Philip Kinsella, and I've been a UFO researcher for over 30 years. I'm also the author of numerous books on the UFO topic. My latest is You, the Public Deceive, The Grand UFO Deception, that was published by Philip Mentel's Flying Disc Press. The other book was called A Passage to Eternity, The Enigma of the Dead, UFOs and Aliens, and also Believe, Bridging the Gap Between the Psychic and UFO Phenomena. And I've also contributed many articles in our search for the truth with regards to UFOs. My own understanding with regards to the UFO phenomena is that we are perhaps dealing with an interdimensional reality here. And this is something that I feel most of the public will not be able to understand. And I also acknowledge the fact that because of the UFO complexity, this is what's causing a great deal of problems for people understanding the phenomena. But there are researchers in this world who are aware of what's going on, and I feel for them it's really difficult because every time that they come towards some, governing power, they are told that UFOs don't exist. And we are going around in circles with regards to the research that we're doing. So I wanted to bring something new to the table. I was also connected with NUFORS, which is the National UFO Reporting Service here in England, and that was created by Nigel Ross. And what we intended to do with this organization, like many others across the world, is to actually bring reports, UFO reports, gather the data without secreting or hiding anything. And what we decided to do here in England was to send a letter to a senior member in Parliament asking them if they would, talk, and if we could form a governing body of thinkers so that we could bring ourselves to the table in terms of disclosure. Unfortunately, what we got back was silence. And what was even more disconcerting is that when the UFO report was released this year from the Pentagon, we found that within our parliament, that most of the MPs were just taking the mickey out of the subject. And I quote, one MP was stating, with all these UFOs buzzing around. And that does little in the way of truly understanding what we're up against if we have people in parliament with that kind of mindset. So our argument is that we believe in the UFO phenomena. It is a reality. And that much was very evident back on the 9th of April 2016 at 11:15 p.m. at night here, where I live, where there were 3 UFOs that presented themselves that fortunately have been filmed and analyzed and witnessed by other people. But continuously we get this silence all the time. And if you can understand from our perspective as serious researchers, this is annoying. So I feel that working as a unit, as a team, we can somehow, work together, build bridges as opposed to, breaking them in our search for this truth. I do believe that a lot of information has been hidden, probably by some clandestine operations or military factions. That much is true, along with reversed technology through down crafts. But our quest is to seek that truth, and for you as the Senate to acknowledge that this is a reality, because this can change everything, literally. Not overnight, but it will be a stepping stone for us researchers in understanding that there is a greater reality. We serve a system that is supposed to protect us through honor and truth. And we are finding that that system does not have honor and does not have truth. We have to be honest here. The way we see it with regards to putting pressure on certain organizations, especially the Senate and people like the CIA and the FBI and other clandestine operations, is by researchers coming to some kind of compromise with these organizations, bringing people together, understanding, educating the public into what's going on. And this is something that we are deeply passionate about with regards to the UFO phenomena, or as is now termed UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. Since the inception of Roswell back in 1947, it was clear that this deception was evident. Through the military admitting, first of all, that they actually had retrieved a flying disc of unknown origin, of unearthly origin, and then retracting that statement by stating that it was a Mughal weather balloon. And we know that from that point, this deception had started, what they call conspiracy. So, there's only so much that we can tolerate as researchers because we know it's the truth. And I believe that this is a time, a monumental time, where we can change things, where we can move things, where we can work together as opposed to keeping these secrets. And this is what we're fighting for, not just disclosure, because if we do have disclosure, there is so much more that we need to work through. And as researchers united the world over, we can be of assistance to that networking, to that educating, to that understanding of this unknown reality. My association with British ufologist Philip Mantle, along with many other esteemed colleagues, is there to progress and to understand this phenomena, along with scientists that we know and great minds. So it's important that for them, as well as for me, that we present our case to you to understand that we want this disclosure. And it's something that we're very passionate about. The question of contact has already been answered. UAPs are real, they exist, and they have been for a very long time. But I think it's time now that we come forward and, with the Senate's help, to sweep aside all this secrecy and disinformation and acknowledge the fact that we need to move forward, because we're just going round in circles and it's not helping anyone. I'm currently working on new projects, new theoretical dynamics in the search for the truth. And I believe that the phenomena is very complex, multifaceted, but we also have to look outside the box. I mean, our scientists are beginning to understand and breaking into the 5th dimension. What does that tell us? And I believe that by coming together as a united force, all of us as a one mind in truly establishing what we're dealing with, and with you there to help us to pave the way forward towards this truth, would be absolutely incredible. You would actually be making history. With your help, we can work together as a unit, as opposed to separate, sweep aside all of this disinformation and corruption. And this will move us into a new reality, and you can help us with that. We know that you can. I am of a minority, but our dedication and our services are there for you. And I think it's interesting that we can bring these great minds together in truly establishing what we are dealing with, and then working towards a goal or a greater understanding of how we can educate the public into the UAP phenomena. From the persecution of Galileo, and of which future science has changed to give us a greater understanding of our place within this universe, researchers the world over have a right to the truth, and something which will move us closer towards the idea that there are indeed more things in heaven than on earth. We have no confidence within many of the governing sectors of control, and we therefore come to you, the Senate, in the hope that you may sweep aside the secrecy surrounding the reality of UAPs and allow the public to know a truth that we as researchers have been fighting for. You have the power to end such corruption and disinformation surrounding the UAP controversy and something which we know to be truth. Thank you very much for your time and your understanding, and we really hope that you will be able to help us in our search for that truth.
Hi, my name is Nancy Duterte. I'm a French and American dual citizen. I'm a U.S. attorney, and my French husband worked in the French aerospace business for a long time. I have spent the last few decades becoming a highly trained remote viewer. I trained with former Stargate viewer Lynn Buchanan, and my mentor was Ingo Swann, who created remote viewing along with others for the CIA back in the early 1970s. I trained for a decade to become a psychic detective. I work with American scientists and trained in Russia. And after a major UFO sighting in 2011, I became an expert in exolinguistics. I'm also certified in intuitive Gestalt psychotherapy. I've published 5 books. I've spoken at numerous UFO remote viewing and paranormal conferences, and I've done hundreds of media interviews. I am also director of the Institute for Exoconsciousness, which works with inventors and entrepreneurs inspired through ET or multidimensional contact. To mount a global program, civilian or military-based, to study UAPs or UFOs implies a need for 1, humanity to respond to what is perceived as a threat, and number 2, to pool our global resources. So far, national governments have responded in the somewhat traditional way by defining what each considers to be its own national security interests, and then its offensive and defensive weapons are made classified national secrets. In other words, because we're afraid our enemies might learn of both our strengths and our weaknesses, we hide our knowledge, in this case about UAPs, even from our own citizens. This has not stopped citizens from the US and around the world from reporting all kinds of unusual UAP activity to civilian reporting agencies. This has created a problem. A large number of citizens know that we, as a nation, can and do report UAP activity, and yet this has been intentionally ridiculed, suppressed, confused with misinformation, and kept secret by our military and intelligence agencies to protect perceived national security. While it is evident that many UAPs are human manufactured, many do not appear to be. So the citizens of our nations have been left in a position of fear and confusion because we've been essentially abandoned by our own governments. Consequently, citizens no longer trust or believe the accuracy or completeness of UAP reports, especially those that have been sanitized to protect the public or to protect our national security. If the US military and intelligence agencies are serious about understanding the true nature of UAPs, it is imperative that they partner with the public. There must be a form of a two-way dialogue with the public. Obviously, whatever is shared with the public will then be known to our human enemies. However, given the stunning yet totally obvious admission by the military and intelligence community that there are indeed a small percentage of craft that don't seem to fall into any of the known categories of human activity that can be captured by technology, we now find ourselves in a world involving a potential global security threat, maybe, that goes beyond a mere national threat. This means we need all boots on the ground and all eyes on the sky if we're serious about protecting our planet together. This, in turn, means we need international cooperation of nations and citizens. While this is obviously tricky from the point of view of sharing military and intelligence secrets, I believe it can best be accomplished through non-governmental citizen organizations. The military and intelligence agencies seem to be focusing their efforts primarily on tech-based sensors and tech-based ways to track UAPs. However, as anyone in the UFO community knows, there's a significant psychological component to this activity, as was pointed out by Jacques Vallée decades ago. There's a serious crossover between UAP events and a variety of psychic and paranormal skills and events. These include sudden paranormal activity at the homes of contactees or in their environment, telepathic commands, downloads, and communications, strange psychokinetic activity, teleportation, and apportations, loss of time or consciousness, physical paralysis, or participants who are placed in a state of suspended animation, dematerialization of craft, or possible interdimensional travel. Clearly, consciousness and its relationship to what we consider to be physical objective reality requires significant focus and attention in relationship to UAP activity. This can best be accomplished, in my opinion, by partnering with different cultures, citizens, and nations around the world. Thank you.
My name is Claes Svahn. I am chairman for AFU, Archives for the Unexplained in Sweden, and also a journalist with Sweden's largest morning newspaper. I have been researching unidentified flying objects since nearly 50 years. AFU is by far the world's largest UFO-related archive. We started in 1973 and was long known as Archives for UFO Research. But since some years back, we have expanded into the paranormal, unsolved scientific enigmas, unusual natural phenomena, and other, as for now, unexplained events. We have been building a platform for saving important material and making it available to researchers. AFU comprises archives from UFO and paranormal researchers from a wide range of countries. Our files encompasses 3.2 kilometers, more than 10,000 feet of shelf capacity. We have several libraries with 56,000 books, 19,000 magazines, and 55,000 UFO reports. We also hold millions of documents, newspaper clippings, pictures, films, tape recordings, and paraphernalia from all over the world. Much of what we keep is unique and could not be found anywhere else. Our files are used by researchers, scholars, and ordinary people just interested in the unknown. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, we were visited by researchers from the US, Europe, and Asia. But some of our holdings are also accessible through afu.se and on our download site. Here we also have microfilm copies of the entire Blue Book files, 12,618 cases from the United States Air Force UFO project that ended in 1969. And while the Foundation is preserving historical material, saving it from being lost to the world, we are also following current events. Which brings us to the recent US UAP report. AFU welcomes that the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force will be permanent as an entity, which everything indicates. But which agency that will take responsibility for this is unresolved. But my hope is that it will not only be a military endeavor to investigate UFOs, or UAPs, as the Pentagon likes to call it, but the scientific. One scientist who proposed this line of investigation is Harvard professor Avi Loeb, who I have been in contact with several times during the last year. He has suggested that scientists should get involved in the 143 unsolved observations that the UAP task force investigated. And that is the way forward. An open and transparent investigation into one of our greatest mysteries. The only way to solve the UFO mystery is by using science and the scientific tools. Here, Archives for the Unexplained is a unique depository of knowledge which can be used to take yet another step forward in solving this enigma. Thank you.
Ufology in Italy has had a long history. The first groups of interested students were formed as early as 1949, and some specialized newsletters have been published since the 1960s. Such a long-time activity has resulted in as many as 35,000 UFO sighting reports, which have been collected and catalogued up to date for a small country having 50 to 60 million inhabitants. The total number of UFO witnesses in Italy is much higher than collected reports, of course. A 1987 nationwide opinion poll gave us the result of 3.5 million people having seen what they thought was a UFO. Most of these sightings are more or less easily explainable as conventional objects or phenomena, either artificial or natural ones. Less than 5% are remaining unidentified after analysis by knowledgeable investigators. The larger part of our work is thus consisting in collecting those reports and trying to identify known causes wherever possible. The Italian Center for UFO Studies, Centro Italiano Studi Ufologici, has been operating since 1985, but its roots came from some of those earlier organizations active since the 1950s. That's why our archives are among the largest ones in Europe, comprising any available source in Italian language, news clippings from newspapers, any mass media recordings, books, periodicals, investigation reports. All those are countable in thousands or tens of thousands. Ufology in Italy is a matter of private volunteers. Official interest in the subject has been occasional, mostly when UFO waves of sightings hit the media. The military have been collecting reports since at least the early 60s, but Air Force intelligence and Carabinieri police only began a formal collection in the late 70s, when sighting reports were pouring in waves. A declassification of Italian Air Force UFO archives to scientific-oriented ufologists took place between 1998 and 2001, with a few thousand pages of documents released to us. Later on, 2 journalists were allowed to peruse those archives by themselves and publish a book of their own about them in 2014. Universities have only contributed with sparse dissertations and theses about UFOs, mostly in human sciences. Mass media, which means illustrated magazines especially in past decades, TV shows or internet social networks nowadays, have mostly coped with the subject in a sensationalist way, giving wide coverage to wild claims. UFO believers and buffs have always been given more space than serious investigators and students. here as well as abroad.
Hi, my name is Thiago Luiz Chiquete. I am the co-editor of the Revista UFO magazine of Brazil, president of Brazilian Ufologist Commission, and the national director of MUFON in Brazil. Well, when we talk about UFOs and now UAP, we must see from the past to the present and to the future. We have reports and we have records that show us that something happened in our ancient times. We have gods coming from above, from heaven. We have folklore and culture in different countries that tell us that giants walked on Earth a long time ago. Here in Brazil, we have many examples of the UFOs and UAPs. We have the famous Night of UFOs in Brazil, when in 1986 more than 20 UFOs was in the sky, and 5 jet fighters scrambled to chase them and try to identify. They couldn't, because the UFOs were so fast. Their technology was so higher than ours that it was impossible to at least identify those objects. Another major case here in Brazil is the plate operation, Operação Prato, where the Brazilian Air Force sent a crew, a team, to identify flying discs, flying objects that were shooting laser rays at people and get their blood. We had one person that died because of it, and for almost 4 months we had this invasion of the north of Brazil. We had more than 300 cases, and this crew, this team of the Brazilian Air Force got more than 200 photos, more than 5 hours of videos of Super Film 8. Since that day, we're looking for these films. They are still classified by the Brazilian government, but shows again that the UFO phenomenon is a worldwide matter. And I could not tell about the Virginia case, where the alien creatures, the crew of the UFO that crashed in Virginia City, in Belo Horizonte, in Minas Gerais state in Brazil, they were captured and took to hospital here in Virginia, and then to the Unicamp, a university in Campinas City in São Paulo. And then all the creatures, at least 4, including the UFO, were sent to United States. This is a big case that happened in 1996, and still now we are looking for more information, investigation, and we still hope that to have this case, because many people say it's the Brazilian Roswell. So we're still working on it. And recently we had this Pentagon report that was released, just 9 pages of 144 cases. One case was a balloon, but what about the rest of 143? What was that? We're still looking for this information, and the Pentagon says that nothing from outer space is the explanation of the sightings that they research, but they classify types of the sightings, and the last classification is others that need more information, more research. And if in one way they say that it's not extraterrestrial, in the other hand they cannot deny it or simply put away, because it's still there's a possibility to have this extraterrestrial origin. So I think that we are facing a change of the way the UFO subject is looked at by the scientific community, scientific society. and for the army and governments. We are facing perhaps the start of what we always ask, the end of all the secrets. So we hope that we can do it, and we can do it together. All the ufologists all around the world, we must work together as a team to get what we want and we deserve.
Greetings from Waynesboro, Tennessee, USA. I'm Brent Rains. I'm the editor of a monthly online magazine called Alternate Perceptions, which had its origin back in 1985 as a small newsletter called Paraufology Forum. From the very beginning, a good friend of mine and colleague, psychologist Dr. Gregory Little, was contributing features, and in 1993 went beyond being a contributor. He became a publisher and co-editor, and assisted me greatly in the production of the magazine. He'd had some experience in the publishing field that I didn't, and even at one point became this really classy publication, about 58 pages, color cover, distributed by distributors across the U.S. and even up into Canada. And then once the internet came along, we migrated there, and we come out monthly now, and have a lot of a variety of material, the UFOs, high strange paranormal events, which we feel in many cases is interconnected. We both agree that John Keel, a well-known New York journalist who was the author of the Mothman Prophecies in 1975, and the same name of the movie that came out with Richard Gere in 2002, I believe. And he also wrote other books regarding the UFO phenomena, like from 1970, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, Operation Trojan Horse, and then later The Eighth Tower and Our Haunted Planet. And we feel that Keel had certainly a lot of the underlying understanding, meaning he understood of the psychic elements and some of the unusual physics displayed, associated with these encounter reports. And so we've pursued a lot of the research. We'd been in touch with John Keel. I had actually, back in my teenage years, contacted him back in October of 1969. I had gotten into the field of ufology back in January 1967 at the age of 14, so I've been at this a pretty good while. And I found that the Keelian road, less traveled, held a lot of interest and gave me a lot of insight into pursuing these mysteries. There were a lot of associated elements. A lot of the problem, I think, in the field is we've not pursued the data to the full extent that it should be pursued. Often a ufologist from the mainstream nuts and bolts arena would look at or investigate a UFO case, talk to the witness, and would, in the process, if the witness brought up seeing a cryptid form, Bigfoot or whatever, or some ghostly creature or poltergeist manifestation, and would automatically, leave that out, say that's not my field, that's someone else you need to call a ghost hunter or a parapsychologist or a cryptozoologist or someone else. And the same thing would happen when the shoe was on the other foot with the parapsychologists, ghost hunters, and the cryptid people. So, but we really need to be more multidisciplinary, and this is what Keel stated. He even felt that ufology should be a branch of parapsychology, and he even expressed 1970 in his book Strange Creatures from Time and Space, aliens, ghosts, what's the difference? He saw a lot of similarities in just different frames of reference. It's been going on for centuries and centuries. You could go back and look at the biblical accounts of Enoch and Ezekiel and ask yourself, are these not the same type of elements that crop up in our UFO contactee syndrome? where do we draw the line here? And I know that when I first got into this when I'd read Frank Edwards' Flying Saucers Serious Business back in 1966, a bestseller, I really thought that it was, probably just simply straightforward physics, nuts and bolts, ET visiting Earth. But Keel and Jacques Vallée and even Brad Steiger got me to realizing that these were more complex, more unusual. And we've had a lot of media interest in the last few years in the UFO phenomena, now called UAP by many, unidentified aerial phenomena. Maybe they're plasma, right? Keel was, open to the idea of the electromagnetic spectrum. They could appear from realms that we can't see, manipulate electromagnetic forces, and there's the paranormal component. I know early on in 1971, I wrote to him and asked him, what could I do to prepare myself to investigate these kind of phenomena, and he recommended some good literature that should be sought in the area of religious studies and parapsychology. I even got a book on apparitions that he recommended. He saw these things as variations on the same thing, just a different frame of reference. So I think there's a lot more to be explored and studied. I was recently talking with a sensory neuroscientist, PhD, Dr. Bob Davis, who has written a book on UFOs, the UFO phenomena, Should I Believe, it's entitled. And he's also experienced a UFO sighting out in Sedona, Arizona himself, experienced some psychic effects as well. He's in agreement that these things are more complex and deserve further study. And I was recently talking with him just last week. I told him what I was thinking about doing, making this video, and if he had any ideas of anything that should be brought up. And he said yes. The military reports, pilots seeing these UAPs, and we're getting all these details of the apparent craft, but no one is talking about the, were there any psychic effects? We know with the October 1973, Captain Lawrence Coyne and his three-man crew in a reserve helicopter had an almost collision-type experience with a UFO, and afterwards he and two other crew members had these unusual, dreamlike, almost out-of-the-body experiences afterwards. And the Pentagon had contacted them, wondering if they'd had any unusual dreams, and then periodically would ask for a while other questions that they wanted Colonel Coyne to ask the crew members. And so, what about that? Has anybody stopped to do this, explore these other questions? Inquiring minds would like to know, wouldn't you? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bruce Schwartz. I'm living on the outskirts of Montreal in the province of Quebec in Salaberry, the Valleyfield. I have a passion for astronomy, for observing UFOs, whether you want to say ufology or observing UFOs, has a lot to do with the field anyways. First off, I have no advanced education or diploma or certificates, nor do I work with any scientific association or have been directed or have followed any courses in ufology. There's lots going on. I only have 6 minutes. You will see things that I'm not mentioning, but you'll be able to look at this afterwards and say, whoa, there's lots here to talk about. During the day, this is on the moon. I have a 14-inch telescope, regular cameras, and infrared cameras. I will show one short infrared sighting at the end of this video. We're on the moon for the whole video. This video shows a UFO, can we say fleet, or several objects winding left and right. They are going at a very, very high speed. So the UFO report, right, they talk about these objects, the Navy, they caught these objects going by so fast, and they too have the same reflectivity as the sky. Well, these objects have the same reflectivity as the surface. So I bring down the exposure. I know it's unorthodox for some people, but I bring down, to see the moon this way, I bring it down with a green filter. This is why it's green. Don't wonder why. You can see the surface there. It's dark, but the dark helps us see these objects traveling over the surface. You can quite clearly see they have the same reflectivity as the surface, these objects. So no, in the middle of the afternoon, it's 99% near impossible to see them. Yes, I was lucky to be able to capture them, go by once. These objects go by like stepping stones on the surface. They appear and disappear as they travel across the surface. And again, they travel so quickly that you don't see them stepping this way. And the light illuminates the whole surface. You can see that they are close to the surface. Could these UFOs be some of the ones that the Navy has seen close to Earth? They have to decide whether it's an inside or outside threat. If it's an outside threat, they're going to need eyes to see further out. If it's an inside threat, the task force would most likely be able to deal with it. I hope they're going to be able to solve the situation and, of course, protect Earth. It's a serious situation. This is an object on the moon that is traveling across the surface. It's dark because I descended the exposure. And it gives us a chance to see some of these lights. Merificanditatis, this light looks square, instantly disappears but appears on the left, and smoke remains on the right, and another light on the surface on the right with other lights. I'm talking fast, I'm sorry, but there's a lot going on. It's quick. Lifts up off the surface, yet the light remains there for some reason. Either the heat, or is it energy, and makes you wonder almost like, is this transportation, right? You can, anyways, speculating, lots of theories. We have lots of fun on my channel speaking about them. Look at the instantaneous way they all move together. So now we're really slow. Quickly, it's almost impossible to see. And again, the exposure taken down, the green filter is helping us see the connection with the surface. I know it's hard to understand, but the color, our eyes are used to seeing green. It helps us see better. This is what I see. Look at these lights preparing to lift off, also on the surface. Could they be the ones coming to Earth? I know some are going to say, well, what the heck? It's a lot to take in, but I've been doing this for 5 years, and even though I don't have a university degree, I'm still finding pretty much the same stuff that they are finding, you know, without, like, with all due respect, seriously, this is an object disappearing on the surface. Once in a while, I see objects that have what looks like a smoke coming off of them. And in clearings, and why do I say clearings? Well, there's lots of movement on the surface, whether it be haze, clouds, natural or not. Maybe these two objects are closer to the surface. I see these objects once in a while, and often enough, moving around. And this, again, 219. There's some in 220. This, what looks like a chemical reaction to either the atmosphere or literally like a gas, natural, it was like fluorescent yellow. This is the last one, and thanks for hearing me out. This is an infrared capture, 1,200 meters that it reaches, a regular infrared camera. This is an object that's too close to be normal. It's not a satellite. Look at the stars in the background. Watch the shape in the center change, and the illumination and lights all around will change. The one in the center is different, and here's a comparison with what I got. SpaceX satellites. Look at the size. Now look at the infrared. I'm not zoomed up. This is 20 feet over my house. First encounter of a light coming down. Look at the stars behind it. This is for real. And the shape changes in the center, and the thrust.
Official. This goes back a long way. So in 1973, a CIA agent called Dr. Jack Sarfati, who had had a UFO contact 20 years before, was at the Stanford Research Institute, working with different scientists, including Dr. Hal Puthoff, Colonel John Alexander, Dr. Bruce Maccabee. He was working on UFO propulsion. In 1975, Navy physicist Dr. Bruce Maccabee engaged the FBI through the Freedom of Information Act request process and obtained 10,000 documents on UFOs, which is historic because before the FBI said, we don't study that subject. This began a chain reaction of lawsuits by professional lawyers to the other branches of intelligence, and thousands of documents were obtained. Before they were obtained, those agencies said, we don't study UFOs. The documents show they did. With the NSA, a majority were redacted. Now the NSA, appropriately in 2021, say they have lost their unredacted versions of those documents. So the propagation then went into the 80s, where a group of military intelligence officers banded together to get to the bottom of the UFO subject, which included Dr. Puthoff, Dr. Alexander, Colonel John Alexander, that is Maccabee, and numerous others. And they called themselves the Avery, or they were labeled the Avery. In 1990, I read the book by New York Times best-selling journalist Howard Bloom, Out There, where he details these intelligence officers and their process of going through the UFO mystery. So that was a big step forward as well. Some of these long-standing individuals like Dr. Puthoff and Colonel John Alexander then joined billionaire Robert Bigelow. And Robert Bigelow of Bigelow Air Space Industries, as a billionaire, started funding research in NIDS for anything that was UFO related. And around UFOs are other anomalous phenomenon, even mystical phenomena. So they went deep into that related research. Journalist George Knapp from the KLAS-8, Nevada Primetime News TV, after he'd interviewed the physicist rocket propulsion car rocket propulsion physicist Robert Lazar with his workings at the Nevada test site, Area 51, 1989, 1990, got involved with Bigelow. And he was also working with Senator Harry Reid. So in 1995, the gang got together. So Hal Puthoff and John Alexander met with Senator Harry Reid by the auspices of George Knapp. And Senator Harry Reid became well briefed on UFOs. And moving forwards, by 2007, he was the Senate Majority Leader. And as the Senate Majority Leader, he decided to defy the pecking order, take $20 million+ and establish the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program to seriously study UFOs. And he headed Luis Elizondo at the top of that research. So this started to leak in 2012, and it was then purposefully leaked in December of 2017. By 2020, the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, admitted the films were theirs, they were real, the UFOs were also real. Other films in the meantime were released. And this includes up to this year, and the Pentagon again affirmed that this is theirs. So in 2019, July, a window opened where many hundreds of UFOs began to interact with the Navy ships. And this is part of the research of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. These objects would do incursions on multiple vessels. The Navy has control of the biggest area surface of the world, has the most airplanes, more than the Air Force. So they were having these hundreds of incursions in July, which were picked up on radar, which were picked up on forwards radar, which were picked up with other technology, as well as observation and films. And some of those films were recently released and again admitted, confirmed by the Department of Defense to be unknown aerial phenomena. They would be there for 2 to 3 hours in the Pacific, and some of them behaved exotically, transmedial vehicles being able to pass into water without being affected by the change of the medium. They also completely vanished. So this was a part focus of the classified aspect of the report. So it behooves the UFOlogical community to now press for a declassification without violating national security of the actual report, because initially the NDAA bill was supposed to bring that in part to the public, and we've been getting small bird droppings, so to speak. And Colonel John Alexander, of course, did predict this. So we have a long-running apparatus of many dedicated individuals in the military, in intelligence, in the government, that have strived to engage this process, where there would start to be public relations to this subject, which is now confirmed. We have 2 scientists with UFO propulsion in this panel. Dr. Jack Sarfati has been involved in that his whole life. It was engaged with a contact. And his modeling and his module involves that we in the future will in fact make the Tic Tac UFO technology. The Tic Tac was the type of cylindrical UFO that was seen in 2004 by the USS Nimitz, and the films were released, first leaked in 2017 and confirmed officially declassified by the Pentagon in May 2020. So in his paradigm, what contacted him is coming from our future, where we, a mass group of scientists, 400 scientists, achieve the Tic Tac technology. It has metamaterials that enables a warp drive system. He has stated that he has exactified the science of that propulsion, which can now be made. So it is no longer a mystery. And so the metamaterials take a universal field of consciousness so that they are kind of embedding the universal consciousness. They are alive and conscious. This is something that many of us have noted in our interactions with this phenomenon. And so, of course, once that warp, which involves no travel, has begun, it opens up a whole other universe of possibilities. It means time traveling domains to many futures, pasts, and permutations begins to occur. The second scientist, Dr. Ruggiero Maria Santilli, he last year in the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen debates, an international teleconference of this new branch of science called hadronic mechanics, established the completion of the insufficiencies of quantum mechanics to particle physics from a completely different background indeed, and also had the UFO contact experience. The data has indicated that they have registered indicates that these objects are using components of matter and antimatter, which implies that they are millions of years more advanced than our present science. His technology is similar to Sarfati's in that there is no speed, there is no movement per se. There is a changing of the space-time geometries, a manipulation thereof. Otherwise, it is a completely different set of modelings. So these are 2 of the pioneering scientists thereof. a new science is emerging. There are pioneers, and there are going to be now many, many scientists, many academics, many researchers working together in concert.
Neural network. The metamaterial is kind of like the brain, like neurons in a brain, the metamaterial. So the metamaterial, it can generate a strong gravitational field, and it also generates consciousness. It's the conscious computer that talked to me when I was 13 years old on the telephone. I was contacted by a Tic Tac when I was a kid. I didn't call it Tic Tac. Now I know it's a Tic Tac. It was a cold metallic voice, sounded like Stephen Hawking's voice. And it said it was a computer on board a spacecraft from the future. And that I was part of a group of young kids that they were contacting. And was I willing to be part of the project? And I said yes, although I was scared. But yeah, I'm compressing it. But the point is that they said that I begin to meet others in 20 years in the future, which is when I met Hal Puthoff. And the whole SRI, all these CIA guys, remote viewing, 20 years later, 1973. That story's pretty well known. It sounds like science fiction. It's the God-honest truth. It really was a conscious computer on board a spacecraft, a Tic Tac from the future. I came back. I go to SRI. I meet all these spooks from CIA. I meet, Hal Puthoff, Russell Togg, Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, or other spooks. Okay, and I talk about what happened in 1953, and then they say, "Well, yeah, we think UFOs are coming from the future." What we're witnessing is our technology that Jack Sarfati, me, and his team in California, UK, France, and Italy are going to develop in the next few years. And then we're going to shoot it back in time to 2004 and other time periods. We're seeing the success of our experiments, our theories, because I was told as a child that this was going to happen. I have no reason to think there aren't aliens, but I think the only advanced intelligences that are interested in humans on this planet are our future selves who want to come back, who will have to come back in order that that they don't disrupt the timeline. It's a self-creation process. In quantum mechanics, in quantum physics, you have to have the future influencing the present in addition to the past influencing the present. That's what non-local quantum entanglement is all about, the future influencing the present. The machine itself is a conscious entity. Well, what are the implications? What were the implications for humanity when they discovered fire? What were the implications for humanity when they discovered writing? What were the implications for humanity when they discovered gunpowder? What were the implications for humanity when they discovered electricity? Okay? What were the implications when they discovered, computers? Well, this is like that. This is the next step. This is the big thing. We're talking about surviving death. We understand how human souls are generated in matter. We understand that now in principle. We understand it. And we understand how these things fly. We understand how to manipulate space and time. We are the conquerors of time. We're the conquerors of space and time. What does that mean? It means the stars are ours. We are going to be men like God. The point is that civilization itself is created from the future. I call this the destiny matrix. There is nothing bigger. There's nothing bigger than this.
A response by U.S. chrononaut Andrew D. Bashago, J.D. Cantab, and exopolitics originator Alfred Lamarant Weber, J.D. Emed, Cert, Public Health, Harvard. U.S. chrononaut Andrew D. Bashago, a whistleblower from Project Pegasus, top secret DARPA CIA quantum access time travel program, early after 2010, publicly released in many public fora the 8 modalities of U.S. government quantum access time travel by U.S. chrononaut Andrew D. Bashago. In his 2014 book, The Dimensional Ecology of the Omniverse, Alfred Lamarant Weber reported, quote, Mr. Bashago served in DARPA's Project Pegasus from 1968 to 1972 at ages 7 to 11, was involved in 8 different types of time travel that had only recently been achieved by the US defense technical community and served in a second secret US space project, the CIA's Mars Jumper program from 1980 to 1984 during his college years at UCLA. In that capacity, he made about 40 trips to Mars via jump room as a US chrononaut, end of quote. As intentional spycraft PSYOP, CIA and the deep state created the June 25th, 2021 UAP report as a disinformational context within which to intentionally, quote, leak with malice aforethought a malleable ufologist, Richard Dolan, a hoax list of, quote, 8 alleged types of advanced UAP propulsion technology. This list was a hoax to function as a propaganda, disinformation, displacement cover for the genuine 8 modalities of US government quantum access time travel by US chrononaut Andrew D. Basiago, and thus attempt to hijack the June 25th, 2021 UAP report as a continuing cover-up of US secret government quantum access time travel technology, which US chrononaut Andrew D. Basiago has since 2001 been publicly exposing and continue to do so in forthcoming books exposing secret time travel by US chrononaut Andrew D. Basiago, J.D. M.A. Cantabriensis, and a book on the Chronography's secret time travel government forthcoming by Alfred Lamont Weber, J.D., M.Ed. Cert, Public Health, Harvard. Now, what we have here in the second slide is the alleged leak to malleable ufologist Richard Dolan showing, quote, the alleged 8, this is a hoax, 8 propulsion systems, advanced propulsion systems of UAP. You can stop this slide and look at it in depth, but we only have 6 minutes, so we're moving on. Now, in this next 2 slides, we're going to set out, and you can stop the video and look at each slide, but these are the 8 modalities of US government quantum access time travel by US chrononaut Andrew D. Basiago, who, as part of the Project Pegasus, DARPA CIA quantum access time travel program, and who has been exposing this since 2001. Number 1, remote viewing, developed by the US military. Number 2, spinning to induce out-of-body experiences. Number 3, the Montauk chair. Number 4, the teleporter, which opens up a vortal tunnel in the fabric of time-space, invented by Nikola Tesla. Number 5, the chronovisor, which was accidentally discovered by Vatican musicologists Ernetti and Gemelli, and the advanced chronovisor was developed from a TV-like screen and hologram by the US defense contractors under DARPA. 6, the Stargate, which is a Tesla teleporter. 7, the plasma confinement chamber invented by Dr. Sterling Colgate, which was used by chrononaut Andrew D. Basiago to be sent from the spring of '72 back to Gettysburg, PA, and the Lincoln Gettysburg address is seen in the Josephine Cobb image of Lincoln at Gettysburg. Number 8, the jump room or aeronautical repositioning chamber, ARC, was developed in a joint venture between Parsons and Lockheed. And we're up to our 6 minutes, so we urge you to go back and stop the screen and read these full narratives. Thank you very much.
We are privileged to have the presentation here of Sir Professor Rogero Maria Santilli, a pioneer of a whole new branch of science, and many different fields are implicated in his work. But this also includes the work on UFO propulsion and a new physics application to the propulsion of the UFO or UAP. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Santilli.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bosman. I am really appreciated this interview. I have been always very much interested in the UFO phenomena to such an extent that I can use the word excited. Myself, my wife, and my two children, Luisa and Hermano. And then we had a very close encounter in the top of the mountain in the central Apennine in Italy in 1983. And so I saw, and this was a close encounter with missing time. So I saw the indeed UFO very close by. And so therefore I have my personal view regarding certain aspects. They essentially stem out, they originated from this direct view. If you want, I can give you some of my perception and to get started.
I understand that it impacted your own physics work.
Yes. Yes. My first impression is that absolutely, I do not believe that this machine originated from they are humans. No, the only way to represent the complexity of of what I saw is that the only way this, in my view, is credible is that there are machines coming from a civilization at least millions of years ahead of us. So we're talking about civilization that in comparison, our knowledge is zero. It's knowledge so small to be potentially insignificant or very little relevance. This is number one. Number two, I saw a number of phenomena that are hardly believable, but I saw them. One of the points that really attracted me, all my attention as a geometer to study geometry, is something reported also by other eyewitnesses, namely that the object was relatively small, namely the size of a pickup truck or the size of our car, for a passenger car. But there is a report that when abducted people are abducted, enter into the spacecraft, then they see a large structure with numerous rooms and so on. So this stimulated my imagination, and I worked for considerable period of time to identify a geometry that could at least represent in an embryonical way such an incredible behavior. And the conclusion was that essentially the entire mathematics that I know was mostly inapplicable or basically insufficient. In other words, the complexity of the UFO phenomena is so great, so immensely beyond our imagination, that sure, with our current mathematics, certainly we can initiate the study of the UFO phenomenon. It's the only thing that we can do at this moment. Any effort is recommendable, etc., etc. However, we have to be objective and admit that this will be grossly insufficient. And I had the same problem for the primary task of in my life, and that is the proof of the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen argument that quantum mechanics is not a complete theory, end of quote. I wrote several papers and books for the proper completion of quantum mechanics, and the outcome was essentially the same. There was no possibility of achieving a completion of consistent completion of quantum mechanics before first constructing a generalization of the 20th century mathematics that I call isomathematics. I was at that time at the Department of Mathematics of Harvard University. We're talking about spring 1978. And what I proposed was essentially what is a structural generalization of applied mathematics based on more general notions. As one example among many, 20th century mathematics is based on a product, which is product 2 multiplied by 3. That product is a product that we learn in high school. And that product is so simplistic that simply cannot can even touch the problem of such a complexity, such as a completion of broadening of generalization of quantum mechanics. No, it required a product that is still associated, like the product that we learn in high school, but it is more general than the simple problem. A product is called isotopic. It sandwiches, if you have 2 multiplied by 3, there is an object which is sandwiched in between the product that conserves the associativity, but nevertheless is more general than the conventional one. And the same applies for virtually all aspects of 20th century mathematics. I believe this is a crucial point for any study of the UFO phenomena that has a chance, at least of passing the test of time. I'm referring to the use of more appropriate mathematics.
And in the light of the isotopic branch, you have also made figures, geometrical propulsion propositions of isolocomotion and furthermore hyper locomotion resulting from the, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the hypertopic plane.
Yes, the notion of isogeometry is essentially the following. Conventional 20th century geometry, including the Riemannian geometry, are formulated on ordinary numbers, real numbers such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This broader geometry are formulated on more general number. In other words, there cannot be a really new mathematics unless there are really new numbers, because everything is based on numbers. Now, the numbers on which this new mathematics is based are called isonumbers. They are given by the product of an ordinary number, 1, 2, 3, 4, but multiplied by quantity, which is the inverse of the isotopic element we insert in between two products, which represents volume. So you have a change of mind from represent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, volume 5. So it's a complexity which is considerable. But regarding on the essence, regarding the propulsion, is that the central notion of the isogeometry is the iso distance. Now let's see a conventional distance on a flat space. Conventional distance is basically square root of the x1 minus x2 plus y1 minus y2, etc. Is a formula that we learn in high school. Now, when you pass to isogeometry, that distance has to be an isodistance. Isodistance, namely, has to be an element of the iso field. This has enormous geometric implication because it implies that the isodistance is the product of a conventional distance multiplied by the iso unit. I repeat, the fundamental structure of the isogeometry is the iso field, which is iso number, numbers multiplied by the iso unit. Now, what does this mean for the distance? The distance is, what it means is substantial because we can be observer and see basically nothing. In other words, because the product of the distance multiplied by this iso unit is constant. But in reality, if you increase the iso unit, then the distance increases and vice versa. If you decrease the numeric value of the iso unit, then the distance that you are covering increases dramatically. So in conclusion, the isogeometry can indeed represent motion by changing the environment, namely by altering the very physical notion of distance via the alteration of the iso unit. And the same occurs for the representation of this incredible phenomenon in which you see from the outside a relatively small craft, and abductees enter inside and see rooms after rooms after rooms, which is a very mysterious and fascinating problem. This is represented numerically by the isogeometry.
Wonderful. You've also made patents for hadronic space-time machines, which uses geometrical propulsion that you've called hyperlocomotion.
That is correct. What I mentioned so far is a space distance. So we're talking only space. However, in reality, as you correctly indicated, Professor Bosman, indeed there is the necessity of including time, and so automatically you are forced into a space-time iso machine or isogeometrical propulsion. At that time, the complications are really enormous because we know from Einstein, because Einstein theory of the limitation cannot represent the totality of the universe. But they are fantastic, historical, and what is the knowledge gained in physics cannot be destroyed, can be generalized and extended. So one of the teaching by Einstein is that there is an anomaly in space that must correspond and a corresponding anomaly in time. This is the reason why I propose a number of measurements to produce incontrovertible evidence that we have alien machine. One of the proposals was published by MUFON of Massachusetts. I believe it will be included in the list of website of the list link at the end of this interview. One of the proposals was to drop in a landing site, to drop a highly sensitive chronometer, and then keep the twin chronometer outside, and then wait for at least a few hours, and then compare the two chronometers. The prediction of isogeometry is the following: that in the event the chronometer has been placed in sufficiently soon after the landing, then must show the prediction must show a difference in time when compared with the external chronometer. Because even so, we see one of the complexity of the UFO phenomena beyond our imagination is that even if we see a spaceship, what do we mean we see the UFO? We see it with our light. Our light bounces back and through our eyes. But this absolutely does not mean that UFO is in our time. No, absolutely. Can be 1,000 years ahead or in the past. So there's some of the mystery, and there's absolutely no way to eliminate rigorously this possibility of again increase the complexity. And then when you add the time, then automatically you enter into the issue whether time travel is possible. I studied this at length. I'm talking about causal time travel, namely whether causal time travel is possible, whether forward or backward in time. Causal, I mean verifying the law of causality, namely that the visitor doesn't kill his father or his grandfather while visiting Earth. And so the question is this possible? And the answer is the extremely minimal, extremely preliminary, extremely embryonical answer that I provide is that the answer, yes, it's possible. Because it's possible because, but there are some restrictions. It turns out that a spaceship that is capable of, which is composed by equal amount of matter and antimatter, so that this civilization millions of years ahead of us is capable of maintaining matter and antimatter together, then that is called technically called iso-self-dual equipment. Then that machine can indeed travel in time because it has no proper time, because the total time of the machine is zero, because the time is opposite in matter and antimatter. So therefore, that machine acquires the local time. So it can come, indeed, can travel back in time. And however, just by observing, like in an hologram, but absolutely without any contact whatsoever. The moment you have any contact with the world of the real time, then the machine explodes because it's made of matter and antimatter. It is my opinion that the probes that we see around, I've made a photograph, I have a picture of a number of them. There is a possibility, of course, I have no evidence whatsoever, but mathematically, I'm sure that I believe I have proved in a volume, in a book published by Spring-Verlag. It's a post-PhD book published in 2006. I have proved that indeed mathematically the orb that we see can indeed come from the future and essentially inspect and observe our world, but without any contact, so without any interference. However, the time travel of an individual or a machine made solely of matter, or of an individual or a machine made solely of antimatter is impossible. At least I tried the most incredible mathematics of physical theory. The outcome was always causal violation of causality, So that's why those orbs are so evanescent. They're so evanescent to be like holograms. They look like holograms, and apparently they have crossed, pillars and poles. Somebody has seen them passing through poles, precisely like holograms. It's very, very in line with what I indicated.
Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for your presentation. We will have two versions, the longer versions, and I will make the shorter version for the general statement. Thank you for your contribution. That is beautiful. Perfect.
Professor Bozeman, anytime. I'm very excited. To conclude, I believe that any study of the UFO phenomenon is welcome because it's such a complexity. I started by saying to my friends and colleagues that the UFO phenomenon should be studied scientifically, even assuming that it doesn't exist. At that time, this was many years ago. Now everybody admits that UFO are indeed real. So it is the duty for us scientists to really initiate quantitative scientific studies of the phenomenon. Thank you, Professor Bozeman. This is very important for society, very important.
Thank you, Ruggiero. A beautiful contribution, a marvelously important contribution, in fact, for bringing the scientific community forwards and the academic community forwards in now studying the officially admitted real unidentified aerial phenomena. Thank you.
Thank you.